I'm Idriss Selhoum. I'm an engineer, an IT engineer by training. I've been working in IT for a good old 17, 18 years now. I have been, I started my career in the software engineering, software development, area, and then I kind of, transitioned towards architecture, enterprise architecture, and around 2013, 14, I moved to the world of cloud and infrastructure modernization. So I stayed in this space for 10 years now.
Right.
So at the moment, I've been with Marks and Spencer for about 3 years.
Right.
I lead the cloud transformation, the cloud platforms teams as well. And I'm also responsible for the core infrastructure modernization work as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I guess it'd be good to kind of understand a bit about Marks and Spencer's, because obviously I know it more obviously from the high street more than anything else.
Yeah.
But obviously there's more to it, I guess, from like logistics, manufacturing, not just like, I guess on the surface you just think of it as just a shop, retail shops and clothes and other things. But it'd be good to kind of understand from your perspective like what it encompasses, because I know we were just speaking before about just the logistics side and things like that have to go on in consideration. So it would be good to get an overview really of Marks and Spencer's from your perspective of like what's involved.
Yeah, well, Marks and Spencer is a historic British retailer. I mean, it doesn't need any introduction or any further introduction than that. I mean, high street shops. I guess one of the important things about Marks and Spencer's that we don't often talk about, I would say, is the trust behind the brand.
Right.
And I think this is really, really important because it really incarnates the values of the business, and it really incarnates how people actually work and collaborate. It is the common denominator for all things that we do, whether it's on IT or in the foods business or clothing and home. We are really, really behind this trusted brand, and it's really the main driver for all things that we deliver. Right at the end of the day. So I think this is really what defines Marks and Spencer. Is probably what differentiates Marks and Spencer's against its competition.
It's definitely known for quality. I think, as well as especially from the food side.
Yes.
As it's like quite posh, isn't it? I suppose in British terms, that's how it's kind of considered. But so then the bits you've been from the cloud transformation element, what did that kind of encompass? I guess what was the key motivator to even do a transformation project at all? Well,
for me, I think like all companies, and I mean those that I have worked with in the past, IT becomes a pile of technologies over the years, and we accumulate complexities and cost dependencies and in legacy systems, et cetera, and then all of a sudden when we zoom out and we look at all of these things and we go, oh my God, I mean, how did we wind up in this place? And how do we continue to modernize and be agile as a business with systems that are so complex and so intermingled? And I think as I said, I mean, we've got to that position where we looked at these systems and said we have to do something about this. I mean, we cannot continue to modernize the business. We cannot continue to drive, our business lines forward, whether it's foods, whether it's clothing and home, or retail operations, or DC operations, that sort of thing, with old legacy systems. So I think that was the trigger, and I think it is definitely a business transformation that's driving the technology transformation. So in that context, as I said, I'm responsible for making sure that we leverage the cloud as a technology or as a catalyst to this business transformation, and we do it in a best possible way. We've been partnering with Microsoft Azure as our primary hyperscaler, and at the moment we are trying to look at a multi-cloud, poly-cloud strategy.
Right. Okay.
So because we think that there are technology capabilities, from other players, and we do not want to miss those.
Right.
So when I think about cloud platform, is really how do we modernize applications? How do we leverage cloud native architectures, not just in the customers and channels area, but across the board. We're thinking about migrating and modernizing our warehouse management system. Our SAP systems is in the pipeline for modernization. So we are really modernizing, our tech stack. And as I said, I mean, these are long projects. And it takes a lot of effort, a lot of investment, a lot of resources, and we have to invest in our people to be able to achieve them.
And when did it? I guess when did you start the project? When was the kick-off, I guess, for you guys when you started to look at Azure? I guess, was that the first cloud you chose? Was it Azure was the first one?
Yeah. So obviously, as a retailer, we did not want to invest too much on Amazon Web Service. I mean, considering Azure and AWS being the leaders.
This is quite common in retail, isn't it?
It is quite common
because they're obviously retail. So it's a little bit like
So the obvious choice was obviously Microsoft Azure, and I guess the journey started about 3.5 years ago. Where we, as I said, I mean, we did not start with the exploratory phase of cloud, like you deploy some small workloads, small applications, and then you learn your way through. We kind of went, full swing. We deployed a massive e-commerce platform. We actually rewritten the whole e-commerce platform, which was done in, I would say, blood, sweat, and tears, and then we learned our way, in that process. We started to deploy applications, and the first type of cloud resource or services that we were looking at is IaaS, basically is VMs, which is the easiest way to deploy an application, right? So you spin up a VM, you just deploy the code, you deploy the database in there, and off you go. And then we started to look at containers, things like Kubernetes. And we have deployed something between 100 and 120 applications into a Kubernetes. So now our Kubernetes estate has grown to something around 76 AKS clusters, which is quite significant.
That is significant.
Yeah. So it's been a learning journey. I think there was a pivotal point in 2021 where we said, we have to revisit our foundation, our core foundation, to be able to scale up, this platform. So we had to review our network architecture to adopt some of the best practices from that perspective. We've reviewed our identity and access management systems to be more secure. We have collaborated very closely with our colleagues from information security to have a strong data governance and data privacy, policies and processes and tooling, et cetera, and CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployments, bread and butter for cloud, and we are continuing our journey.
Did you look at the CAF, the well architected framework for Azure? The landing zone stuff.
Yes.
Is that what you adopted first? Because it was probably 3.5 years ago, not as mature as it maybe is now, but
so the well architected framework was for us, the blueprint for our landing zone. I mean, obviously, we didn't want to implement WAF just as is, so we wanted to look at the components that made sense for us. And we've changed some of the other components to accommodate some of the some of the specific policies, for example, or compliance requirements for us. But it was a really good place to start.
Yeah, they're quite good at that, actually. I think they've done a really, compared to most of the cloud vendors, they've got quite a mature view of an enterprise, of all the right capabilities for policy and governance and connectivity and identity. They've laid it out quite well compared to the other cloud vendors. So I was quite impressed, really, because I wasn't I was more Amazon historically, and then moved into kind of learnt Azure, and then you start to get to compare a bit, and you're like, actually, it's quite enterprise driven and architected, which I think makes it a lot easier for large scale organizations to move into it, because they've thought about all the things that enterprises care about.
No, it's interesting because when you think about Microsoft as an enterprise, I mean they come from the world of enterprises. I mean, they work with big corporations, so I think they're very much familiar with how enterprise or big companies would actually adopt their technologies. Amazon comes from a different place. They come from retail, which is B2B, B2C, consumer-based platforms, which is a completely different place. I mean, even though I think they were the leaders in terms of deploying cloud for their own purposes, and then it became AWS. And you're right. I think the landing zone and the well-architected framework is definitely something that was beneficial for us because it really alleviated the pain of having to learn, maybe sometimes to the detriment of security, to the detriment of not being able to leverage the platform to the fullest. So yeah, and to your point, this well-architected framework is something that continues to grow. Because those platforms, whether it's Azure, Google, or Amazon, continue to deploy new services, and it's ever changing. So we have to adapt to that change as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. So the e-commerce then, when you decided to do that, I think you mentioned to me before it was pre-COVID times.
Yeah.
So I guess a few questions, like why that service overall? Was it struggle? Was it like constraints on like reliability? Like was it on-prem originally? Like I guess it'd be kind of interesting to know what it was made up of before you moved it.
Yeah, so it was a proprietary tech stack, and yes, it was running on premises. And I think we realized, and this is probably a common driver for all migrations to cloud, is we realized that capacity is limited on premises, and you can only scale up to whatever hardware you have, whether it's compute power, whether it's storage space. And when you design an e-commerce platform, I think one of the requirements is to be able to scale, up and down regarding the number of client of customers connected to the platform, and also depending on the periods of the year where you want to launch promotions and you're expecting some hits on the website. So we soon realized that this platform cannot grow and cannot scale unless we pour a lot of capex into it. So I think that was the trigger where we decided to move it to a place where we can have access to those features in a push button. Really, we didn't have to buy any hardware or invest any capex. Basically, just scaling up or scaling down depending on traffic. And I think the results were astonishing. I mean, we managed to deploy the platform. Obviously, we didn't do a like-for-like deployment, so we leveraged this opportunity to start rethinking about the design of the website, engaging with some UX and UI kind of experts to really revamp some of the elements of the website. So it was a really massive transformation.
Did you do like a full lift and shift first and then modernize, or did
Correct.
you try and
Yes.
you were like let's get the reliability and scalability first,
exactly,
and then worry about improvements afterwards, because then you've got a quick benefit without slowing it down, haven't you? That way. I guess then the reward post-COVID, I guess when the COVID hit, which was quite lucky, I guess, in some ways, because it was unpredictable. Yes. Then I guess you got to capitalize on the scale of the cloud, and then the demand coming in obviously digitally, and then it was like, actually this was definitely worth it.
Yes, and what's also interesting to say is, because we've deployed the e-commerce platform, we could also benefit from that foundation to deploy other applications or other websites. An example is click and collect. I mean, when COVID hit, click and collect became commodity, right? Yeah. So the teams were able to quickly develop and deploy the click and collect to different places, and thanks to the way we've adopted cloud for e-commerce, that gave us this this competitive advantage to be able to deploy those apps quickly, right?
How did you do the connectivity stuff? I guess because it would have been in other systems, the e-commerce would have needed to speak to. Did it? To be fair, I'm just guessing. I'm guessing there's like maybe, I don't know, like the ordering system or like the logistics element of like the processing of orders and things like that, which I'm presuming would have been still on-prem.
Yes.
And was that tricky to get them to still integrate, or was that just pretty much connectivity based, and that was that? Or
well, I think it's a combination of network infrastructure, so connectivity between the cloud environments and on-premises environments is key. So we rely on the express route connectivity between Azure and on-premise. Sorry. In terms of the integrations, we do have a scalable integration platform both on-premises and in the cloud. So we did migrate some of the integration services into cloud, but we haven't done a full migration. So most applications that the e-commerce website would rely on would sit on-prem. And the integration piece of that is on premises, things like order management system, warehouse management system, customer ordering, all of these things, or all of the data flow that comes from the website all the way down to the to the backend system has to flow through the express route all the way down to the integration layer, and then transferred and processed by the backend systems.
Yeah, so then I guess it was more connectivity based with express route and things like that first.
Right, yeah.
When you modernised, did you then start to move into container based things then, or did you just start carrying on with, I guess, also the data side? Because I guess you must have, given the size and given the length of time Marks and Spencer's been around, the amount of data must be pretty large.
It is.
Over time, I guess. I don't even know whether you have to, regulatory-wise, how long you even have to keep that data for, even if you have to. I don't know really what the...
We're not. I mean, we're not as regulated as other industries, like financial industries are very much regulated. And I think they have to keep the data for, for 7 years or something like this. I mean, we're not falling under the regulations. However, we do hold ourselves, to really high standards when it comes to data management and data governance. I mean, obviously, we don't hold as many confidential and secret data as a bank. Or
fair.
So I think the problem that we are hitting at the moment is our data storage is growing, has been growing for so many years, and when we move to the cloud, if you take this data as is and you move it to the cloud, the cost element of that migration is horrendous.
Right? Very high.
So as we move applications and their underlying databases into the cloud, we have to think about which data has to go to a hot kind of storage, which data has to go to some sort of an archival Glacier type of storage, because the application does not necessarily need it to transact. And we are working with our data teams to be able to implement those pipelines and processes.
Will you still, do you think, keep data on-prem just from a cost perspective for, I guess, more like historical or like archive data? Because I guess if you've got the investment, the CapEx investment, would it still work out cheaper from a data side? Because I know the cloud, like even with like all the best incentives that they can give you, it can be like insane. Money can it sometimes. I mean, it's got phenomenal advantages, but it's also not cheap to get them. So do you think you'll end up leaving some things on-prem data-wise and then using kind of the most proactive current data, things that you need in cloud? Or do you think you'll just go all out and be like, actually, we just need to get rid of the data centers because there's a high cost either way?
I mean, ideally, we want to get out of the data center business. Right. That's our North Star. Right. We're not in the infrastructure business. I think we should let the other players who are doing a much better job at doing this. I guess from my perspective, and speaking of experience, I mean, you always need that small residue of storage on premises, because there are certain data that will not move to cloud at the same cadence as the other applications. And to your point, we have to keep that small space where we can store some of the some of the data on premises just in case. And also we do have certain use cases where we need the data to be on premises. Like, for example, we have designers in our offices in Waterside, and they rely on some on premises storage to work. So we have to keep those types of data storage on premises, because I think latency and network connectivity could be an issue. When you're doing a design and you need to pull the files directly from a closer location. So so these are the typical use cases. But again, I think that would represent something between 15 to 20% of our overall data estate. If I look forward in our journey to cloud. But yeah, we and I think the cost for maintaining that on-premises data is going to be much higher than the one in cloud, because you've got the facilities, you've got the on-premises cost, the heating, the energy, all that stuff, just to keep that those appliances up and running. So
that makes sense. How did people take it? Because I guess there'll be a lot of people that like network engineers,
Yeah.
maybe security engineers that are more like on-prem kind of focused, just because that's just where they've come from. So obviously how they've understood security will be more on an on-prem perspective, and not necessarily how to do it in the cloud, because it is different. Was there like challenges there on like education, upskilling, kind of hiring resources, like who's got the skills to know all about, even the CAF, not everybody, it's not equal on like knowledge, like some people know bits, but was that difficult to kind of do, or was everyone quite on board? And I guess what did that look from the people side?
People understood the importance of moving to cloud, and we understood the change of the paradigm of public cloud in so many areas, not just security. And I think the teams have started to embrace the idea that cloud has a different model for doing security, but the concepts, the underlying constructs of security are the same. It's all about firewalls and DDoS and those kind of things that speak to security folks, and it's just how do you implement them in the cloud, which is different. Right. And I think one of the things that we've understood from the early days of doing cloud is the public cloud platforms give you access to all security services, but you have to do your piece in terms of configuring those services. I mean, a simple example is, if you deploy a database in cloud, you don't expect the cloud provider to automatically secure that database for you but it gives you access to all the features to do the security, encryption, data masking, for example. You just have to turn on those features. So I think it's a learning curve. It's a learning journey for most of our colleagues in different areas. But understanding the split of responsibility between what we should do as consumers of cloud and what the public cloud providers do is really, really important.
Yeah, because it's different per service, isn't it, as well? Like some are like really SaaS-like.
Yeah.
Some then the responsibility is more on the customer. I guess it just depends on what it is.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not like a blanket. I do think though most people do actually believe it is blanket. As in, like, I think there is a misconception that pretty much most of it is like SaaS, and everything's kind of there, and you just kind of consume. You don't need to worry about anything, which isn't true, obviously. But I think unless you've used the cloud, I think from a high level perspective, not everybody understands like how much you've got to retain as a skill in your business to bridge what you're doing and what the cloud's giving you. So I think that's a bit like of a challenge for most orgs. So I guess then, so the security teams was more like requirement driven. So I guess the requirements were the same anyway from security. How they were met was kind of just different solutions to the same requirements. The ways of working though, like infrastructure as code and like policy as code, and it's not, I mean, I don't know if you went all out on all the cloud services or whether you started to do a bridge of like appliances in the cloud, because obviously you could, if people like know Cisco and then they're like, all those commands you're used to running, you're not going to do anymore. This is going to be like Terraform configuration or something like that. That's quite like, and Git,
Yes.
And it's like, well, I've never dev'd, so I don't know Git and I don't know Terraform. Like, did that happen, or did they get upskill in that, or was it more like DevOps took over those things and worked with the teams? Like, how did it work?
Well, it's interesting because it depends on the teams, and it depends on the people as well. I mean, if I take the software engineers as an example, I mean, we've got brilliant people in the teams, and some of them are very curious about how Terraform works, how to set up an infrastructure as code stack, and that sort of thing. And other people would just say, I want to consume whatever's available to me from the cloud platform without worrying about how it works, behind the scenes. So it really depends on the level of willingness, I guess, from people to learn your technologies. Because to your point, Terraform and infrastructure as code and GitOps and all of these things that have come with cloud are completely different from a normal development or software development,
definitely.
life cycle. one thing for sure is we've adopted, those best practices. So Terraform is a standard at MES in terms of deploying infrastructure. I mean, we almost deploy everything in cloud using Terraform now. GitOps is also, something that we've adopted. Policy as code is also something we've adopted. So we are really moving towards standardizing deployments into cloud by no manual deployment. Everything is automated. So in terms of some product teams, some software development product teams have adopted some site reliability engineering practices as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've got some platform engineers, and these platform engineers are actually bridging the gaps between the software teams and the infrastructure teams in certain places. But we are learning from that journey. So we haven't rolled out SRE across the board. So we're still progressing on that space. Yeah.
Is it more platform bridging? Would you say it's true SRE as a principle, or is it more where will they modify the application code to improve the operational efficiency?
Yes.
Or they will. So there will be full blown engineering in it.
Right, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the interesting thing about SRE is, which makes it really hard to find, by the way, is it requires a good mix between software skills and infrastructure skills.
Yeah.
So you have to find that sweet spot between you understand how the application development works, you're able to make changes to the code, but you also understand how the world of infrastructure. I mean, not being an expert, by any stretch, but at least understand how to deploy a full-blown stack on Azure or another platform. And in the event of an issue with the application, whether it's a performance issue, whether it's a bug, you should be able to to look at the end-to-end stack between all the way from the code to the infra layers.
Yeah.
And also be able to collaborate with the cloud platform and the infrastructure platforms team to provide feedback, right? Because what we do in a cloud platform, for example, we develop some automation stacks, and we want those software engineering teams to adopt those assets. But we rely on their feedback to say, well, that component does not work well, or it would be good if you can add that particular service because there's specific requirements. So having that continuous feedback loop between the software and the SREs and the platform teams, cloud platform and infra teams is essential.
Yeah.
Really.
How have you found the operational side of stuff? Because sometimes the platform, I don't know, I'm kind of got a bit of a mixed opinion on the industry because I don't feel like we've ever really solved. These things never really get solved per se. They just evolve.
Yes.
And there's different ways to achieve things over time.
Yeah.
And then all the technology stacks are obviously changing constantly as well. So it's not like it's gone from VMs to containers to functions to now AI to it's always on the move.
Yeah.
But there's a bit of a paradigm of platform engineering to provide central capabilities. But what I've seen, and you can kind of tell me I'm full of absolute nonsense if you want, but what I've seen is I think there'll always be a high focus on the delivery side because that's where everyone begins. And I think it's quite easy to create things in the cloud. The creation of stuff is probably the most simplistic thing, but it's also superficially feels like that's the value. And then there's another phase, once people have the things, is then the operationalization of them all, right? So there's then the how is everything being managed from a versioning perspective? Where are everybody? What is all the teams on from a version of this Terraform module even? And upgrading things like you were saying in the cloud where we're responsible for moving people through certain versions of things or increasing the policy versions that might change over time and the drift that someone's on. And I think those concerns you don't hear much about in the industry. People don't really talk about them as challenges, but they're there, but they never really get surfaced. And in the industry, I never really, to be fair, you'll do research, no one really talks about it. They talk about the engineering side, but they don't talk about the life cycle management side of over time. And I don't know if that's just because it's new, and therefore those challenges haven't surfaced enough yet where they've become concerns, or like what it is. I don't know what your opinion is. It's a bit of a random thing to talk about, but
yeah, it's an interesting topic because again, it ties back to you can't operate the cloud platform the same way you do on premises. I mean, you have to be cognizant that it comes with its own set of challenges and its own new ways of doing things, and we have to and this is where the well-architected framework plays a key role, because it sort of gives you that blueprint of things that you have to do up front, to be able to operate the platform, your application and databases, whatever. It gives you that security blueprint as well. I mean, obviously, companies will have to add their own policies and layers on top of that, but at least you have a good foundation. And you soon realize when you look at the well-architected framework, for example, that it's not a matter of just spinning up that VM or spinning up that that database or that storage account, and you have to do lots of other stuff to be able to to ensure operations. A simple example is just backup and restore. Really, like you spin up a VM. If that VM goes down and you haven't put it in a kind of a resilience or a failover cluster, then your VM is gone, right? Data is gone. And that's just one simple example among other things. So I think again the core foundation for any cloud platform has to take into consideration all of these operational elements. I mean, from operating the platform itself and the different cloud services, all the way up to service management, so things like how to manage changes, how to manage incidents, how to manage requests, how to allow the teams to quickly spin up and spin down platforms, so the self-service element, because one of the frustrations is, and I've seen many companies struggle with this, is because we add so many layers on top of the existing cloud service, and anyone could actually go to the Amazon portal or Azure portal and spin up whatever resource they want. So this is the experience they would expect from the enterprise cloud platform. So if you don't give that self-service capability and the autonomy to the teams without the detriment of security and governance, this is
a challenge.
The sweet spot. Right? The sweet spot. So and again. Other areas are not being considered, which I think are really, really important. So things like security as code, and how to engage with the security teams at the right level to be able to say, okay, I can quickly deploy my applications, but within my deployment process, I do the due diligence from a security perspective to make sure I'm not introducing vulnerabilities in my code. I'm not introducing, some vulnerabilities in the packages that I'm downloading from different sources. Is my container safe or secure to run in that particular environment? So all of these things should be fully automated and policy-based, deployments. And it's always that balance, it has to be secure, but at the same time we have to give autonomy to the teams. And similar experience they would get if they go and deploy things individually.
So who is? Because I think I think you're spot on. I think the issue, the reason I think the move of like things that have been iterated on that are kind of coming from the platform team. It's like you're talking about, like we've got Terraform modules and obviously you can put those in pipelines and check against check off, check all the security and publish them, right? But as things are changing, you're then modifying those, and then you might have versions of the policies that you're deciding also, because policy could change, right? So you kind of have things that are always like moving in time. But the responsibility of who operationally is responsible for instigating the change to a line is the bit that's tricky, because the team that's impacted by aligning wasn't the team that created the modules, right, that have now got the changes in them. So you kind of have this like there's like a delta difference between like things that are new, a bit like vendors do, I suppose, right? They're publishing new versions of things, but it's down to the customer to kind of upgrade those versions, and then you're like end of life. And you might be out of support or whatever else. It's kind of similar in some ways as internal teams, like you're kind of vendoring in versions of things, presenting them back to teams. But some of those teams, I guess, may not have the capabilities in them to upgrade, or might not understand the impact, or and I think that's the difficult bit of the industry at the moment, where it's not a solved problem because it's knowledge based.
Yes.
I think at the moment.
Yeah.
So there's like, but I kind of think that the teams consuming should also be responsible for like making the decisions of when they upgrade.
Absolutely.
Because they own the users at the end of the day and the disruption. So,
Yeah.
but it's a hard ask. I mean, it's tricky because it takes a lot of engineering to kind of get to that mature place. It's
absolutely. And I think the challenge comes from the fact that certain things can be managed centrally and certain things have to be decentralized.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, there are certain things that we manage centrally because they don't add any value to the teams at the end of the day. Like upgrading a Kubernetes cluster from 1.24 to 1.25. That's something that has to to be seamless and frictionless across the board without having to engage with the teams. But there are other things where the product teams or the software teams have to be involved in terms of defining the versions, the configurations, and again, it's always a balanced conversation because they should have the autonomy to be able to make those changes, but not to the detriment of and of governance, of rules and principles that we've applied, or we're trying to apply in our platform. So
do you have like a blended mix of like some teams are very? I think you must do, because you were mentioning some teams are more mature, not necessarily more mature, but some teams have more of an appetite for the cloud than maybe others, and so I guess it must be a bit of a mixed blend of.
Yeah, I think in terms of in terms of our maturity, it's an ongoing journey. Actually, there are certain places where we think we are quite mature, but because this cloud platforms change all the time, it's difficult to say that's it, we're done. We're finished with the cloud. Take OpenAI as an example. Like at the moment, every conversations I have been involved with talks about Gen AI and how to leverage Gen AI, and and you have to, as an enterprise technologist, you have to be able to discern facts from the fantasy, in so many different places, and I'm sure there will be other things coming up in the next couple of years, months, whatever. So. We shouldn't fall in love with our technology. That's the first principle. And should be able to adopt a change whenever change is relevant to our business. And we should also keep an eye on what is the value that we add and we bring to our business by adopting these technologies.
That's very interesting. And if you were to go back to yourself 3.5 years ago, now you're 3.5 years in, and you've seen like all the journey kind of where you are now, what would you have done differently? Like if you were to give advice to your old self, what would you give that you might be like, oh, these things maybe I wouldn't have done it that way, or maybe there's things you've learned that you would have expedited. Are there things that you would like to, I guess, advise yourself on historically to not do, or things to have done?
It's a difficult question.
It's
a difficult question because for me personally, I always think myself as a perpetual learner, right? So I don't succeed or fail. I just learn. I learn from things, and I try to be more, I would say, empathetic in so many different ways, not just the personal empathy. It's the empathy to be able to listen and to empathize with many people around you, whether it's customers, whether it's partners, whether it's colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this is a tremendous source of learning from different people, because once you start thinking about other perspectives, other ways of looking at things, you grow up.
True.
And I think for me, this is really important. So I have no regrets. I mean, I made mistakes. Like everybody else, but I think you can't learn if you don't make mistakes.
I was just wondering if there was things that, if people are going on the journey themselves now, whether there was like more for like an advice perspective of things you've learned that you'd be like, actually, these things are probably
If I
key
put
things?
this in the context of our own transformation, what we would have done differently is probably invest more in the landing zones and the foundations that probably there are things that we've kind of tried to repatriate from old environments, not managed environments, into managed environments. So if we have done that appropriately at that time, maybe that could have saved us some time and some pain from that perspective. DevOps, we would have probably had some interesting conversations with different stakeholders within our business to think DevOps is not just about the tooling; it's about people and processes.
Yeah.
It's a collaborative contribution framework. Really, it's not it's not a library that you download and you put in your code, so to speak. So having that common understanding of those concepts is key. So probably I would have communicated more, maybe spend more time with those stakeholders to explain those things. And one last thing I would say, the ability to articulate the value of doing cloud, not from a technology perspective, but more from a business perspective. Because at the end of the day, our business leaders care about three things: cost, revenue, and risk.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, you should be able to articulate the value of technology in those three terms.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe I would have changed my way of communicating about the values of cloud in a non-technical terms, but more in a business kind of terms.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really that's good advice, because I think you're spot on there on those three things and what matters to a business.
Yeah.
And the industry's a little bit our space is very technically driven.
Yes.
And it's hard for a lot of technologists to connect the delta between what they're technically doing and the value that it's going to drive somewhere else, which you're right, falls into those three buckets most of the time: revenue or risk, or kind of like future opportunity sometimes as well. So but awesome, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to hear your story, so thanks for that.
All right, my pleasure.
Cheers.